Victoria Ashford had a way of looking through people rather than at them. In her world of glass towers and million-dollar deals, most humans were simply functions. The waiter bringing her coffee, the driver opening her car door, the housekeeper dusting her shelves. They existed to make her life smoother, nothing more. Tonight was her annual charity gala, held in the grand ballroom of her penthouse overlooking the city. 200 guests in designer gowns and custom suits, a silent auction featuring artwork worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, and Victoria standing at the center of it all, checking her diamond watch for the third time in 5 minutes. "Where is the pianist?" She snapped at her assistant who was frantically typing on her phone. "He canceled Mrs. Ashford food poisoning. I'm trying to find a replacement, but on such short notice, this is unacceptable." Victoria's voice was ice. "We have guests arriving in 20 minutes. I need background music, not excuses." That's when Elena appeared from the kitchen wearing her usual gray uniform. She'd worked for Victoria for 12 years, cleaning the penthouse 6 days a week, invisible as the air. "Mrs. Ashford? If I may, my son plays piano."
"He could help just for tonight." Victoria barely glanced at her.
"Your son? Is he any good?"
"Yes, ma'am, very good."
"He studies music at—" "Fine, have him here in 15 minutes. Tell him to keep it quiet and classical. Nothing modern or loud. The guests should barely notice he's there." Elena nodded and pulled out her phone, calling her son with shaking hands. She knew what her boy could do, the hours he practiced in their small apartment, the scholarship letters that had arrived just last week. But she also knew Victoria wouldn't care about any of that. 20 minutes later, David stepped into the penthouse, his dress shirt borrowed from a neighbor, his shoes polished until they shined. He was 17, tall and nervous, carrying sheet music in a folder his mother had bought him for his birthday. The Steinway grand piano stood in the corner like a sleeping giant, more expensive than anything his family owned. Victoria swept past him without introduction. "You're the pianist? Start with Chopin. Keep the volume low. People are here to socialize, not attend a concert." David sat at the piano bench, his heart hammering. He'd played in school recitals, at church on Sundays, even at a small competition last year. But never like this. Never as furniture. His fingers found the keys and he began to play. Nocturne in E-flat major, soft and gentle, technically perfect. Around him, guests started arriving in clusters, their laughter and conversation filling the space. Not one person looked his way. He might as well have been a recording. From the kitchen doorway, Elena watched her son, her chest tight with a mixture of pride and sadness. She'd raised him alone after his father died, working 12-hour days to keep them afloat. Every piano lesson had been a sacrifice, every music book a choice between that and something else they needed. And now here he was, playing like an angel, and these people walked by like he didn't exist. Victoria circulated through the crowd, air-kissing cheeks, accepting compliments on her dress, her renovations, her generosity. She'd raised $500,000 before dinner was even served. A success by any measure. "Lovely music," one guest remarked. "Where did you find the pianist?" "Oh, just someone local." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Now let me show you the new Rothko I acquired." An hour into the evening, Victoria returned to the piano. David was playing Debussy now, still keeping it soft, still being invisible. She stood beside the piano for a moment, not really listening, just making sure everything was running smoothly. "Excuse me," she said, and David's fingers stumbled slightly before recovering. "Could you play a bit softer? People are having trouble hearing each other." "Yes, ma'am." His voice was quiet, respectful. Victoria was already walking away, missing the flash of hurt in his eyes. She missed a lot of things, actually. The way his fingers moved across the keys with the precision of someone who'd practiced 10,000 hours, the subtle emotion he wove into each phrase, even while keeping it background appropriate, the fact that he was adjusting classical pieces on the fly, transitioning seamlessly between them without sheet music. David played for 3 hours straight. His back ached. His fingers grew tired. But he kept going because his mother needed this job, and he wouldn't do anything to jeopardize it. Between pieces, he glanced at the guests. They clinked glasses and laughed at jokes he couldn't hear. They discussed stock portfolios and vacation homes. Not once did anyone ask his name. Near the end of the night, a little girl wandered over. She was maybe 6 years old, daughter of one of the donors, wearing a velvet dress and patent leather shoes. She stood beside the piano, watching his hands move. "You're really good," she whispered. David smiled at her, the first genuine smile of the evening. "Thank you. Do you know any Disney songs?" Before he could answer, the girl's mother swooped in. "Sweetie, don't bother the help. Come say goodbye to Mrs. Ashford, the help." David kept playing, but something inside him crystallized. He wasn't a musician tonight. He wasn't even a person. He was ambiance, like the flower arrangements or the dim lighting. When the last guest finally left, Victoria kicked off her heels and surveyed the room with satisfaction. The event had been flawless. Elena emerged from the kitchen to begin cleaning up, and David closed the piano lid carefully, gathering his sheet music. "Elena, have your son stop by the front desk on his way out?" Victoria called over her shoulder. "I left an envelope with $200. For his time." "Thank you, Mrs. Ashford," Elena said quietly. David wanted to refuse the money. He wanted to tell this woman that he'd just been accepted to Juilliard, one of the best music schools in the world. That he'd beaten out hundreds of other applicants. That he'd written compositions that made his teachers cry. But he looked at his mother's tired face and kept silent. $200 would help. On the subway ride home, Elena held her son's hand like she used to when he was small. "You played beautifully tonight." "Nobody noticed, Ma. I noticed." She squeezed his hand. "And that's enough, isn't it?" But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. David stared out the subway window at the city lights blurring past, and something shifted inside him. He'd spent his whole life trying to be good enough, talented enough, deserving enough. But for people like Victoria Ashford, it didn't matter how good you were. If you came from the wrong place, wore the wrong clothes, had the wrong last name, you'd always be invisible. That night, lying in bed in the apartment he shared with his mother, David made a decision. He wouldn't stay invisible. He couldn't change who he was or where he came from. But he could play so loudly, so brilliantly, that people like Victoria Ashford would have no choice but to see him. He just had to figure out how. Outside his window, the city hummed with millions of lives, millions of stories, and somewhere across town in her penthouse, Victoria Ashford slept soundly, never suspecting that the background music she'd barely noticed would soon become impossible to ignore. 2 weeks after the gala, David sat in his tiny bedroom with his headphones on, fingers flying across his keyboard. The room barely fit his bed and desk, but he'd made it work. Posters of famous composers covered the walls. Sheet music spilled from every surface. This was his world, the one place where he wasn't invisible. His mother had just come home from another long day at Victoria's penthouse. Elena kicked off her shoes and collapsed on the couch with a sigh that seemed to come from her bones. David could hear her through the thin walls, and it made his chest ache. 12 years she'd worked for that woman. 12 years of "Can you stay late?" and "I need this done by tomorrow." And not once, not ever, had Victoria asked about Elena's life. Her dreams, her son, nothing. The anger David had been holding since the gala poured out through his fingers. He'd been composing for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, barely eating. The piece was unlike anything he'd written before. Classical piano mixed with modern electronic beats, emotional, raw, honest. He called it invisible. It was a story told through music. The steady, repetitive bass line represented his mother, working day after day, dependable as sunrise. The piano melody was him trying to be heard above the noise. And the crescendo, the moment where everything exploded into sound, that was the breaking point. The moment you refused to stay quiet anymore. David recorded himself playing it on his phone at the community center where he taught free lessons on weekends. The video was simple, just him and the piano shot on a cracked phone screen. He posted it at midnight with a caption that came straight from his heart. For everyone who's ever been treated like background noise. Then he went to bed, not expecting anything. He woke up to his phone vibrating off the nightstand. Notifications flooded his screen. Hundreds, thousands. The video had been shared by a famous music producer, then a popular singer, then it jumped to different platforms. By the time David stumbled into the kitchen for breakfast, Invisible had 500,000 views. "Ma, something's happening," he said, showing Elena his phone. Her eyes went wide. "David, this is... How many people have seen this?" "It's not stopping." His hands were shaking. "People keep sharing it." They watched together as the numbers climbed. 1 million. 2 million. 5 million. The comments section filled with stories from hotel cleaners and delivery drivers and waiters. People who served others for a living. People who were looked through instead of looked at. My manager doesn't even know my name after 3 years, I cried listening to this. This is exactly how I feel every day. Showing this to everyone I know. We're not invisible. By that evening, news outlets picked up the story. A 17-year-old kid from Queens had created an anthem for working people everywhere. Journalists wanted interviews. Music labels wanted meetings. His video had 20 million views and counting. David's phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. He answered hesitantly, "Is this David? This is Rebecca Williams from the Today Show. We'd love to have you on tomorrow morning to talk about your viral video." His mother grabbed his hand, tears streaming down her face. This was real. This was actually happening. At the Ashford penthouse the next morning, Victoria sat at her breakfast table scrolling through her phone while her assistant rattled off the day's schedule. She wasn't really listening. She was reading an article about some viral video everyone couldn't stop talking about. "Invisible becomes anthem for overlooked workers," the headline read. "Teen pianist captures what millions feel." Victoria clicked on the video more out of boredom than interest. The music started and something about it seemed familiar. The face of the young man playing looked familiar too. It took her a full 30 seconds to place him. "Wait," she said, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. "Isn't this Elena's son?" Her assistant leaned over. "Oh my God, it is. The one who played at your gala." Victoria watched the entire video in stunned silence. This music, this powerful, moving, incredible music, was nothing like what she'd heard that night. Nothing at all. The boy she'd told to play quieter was everywhere now. Every news site, every social media platform, every conversation. "Get Elena," Victoria said quietly. "Please." Elena appeared a few minutes later, still wearing her cleaning gloves. "Yes, Mrs. Ashford?" "I just saw David's video. I had no idea he was so talented." Elena's expression didn't change. "Yes, ma'am. I'd like to help him. I know people in the music industry, people who could open doors. Perhaps I could host a proper showcase here, invite the right crowd. Give him real exposure." For 12 years, Elena had said yes, ma'am, to every request. She'd stayed late without complaint. She'd rearranged her schedule at a moment's notice. She'd accepted every last-minute change with grace. But something in her had shifted too, watching her son's courage. "Mrs. Ashford, that's very kind of you," Elena said slowly. "But David doesn't need your help anymore." Victoria blinked. In 12 years, Elena had never refused her anything. "I'm sorry? The opportunities are coming to him now. He's worked his whole life for this. He earned it himself." Elena's voice was steady, respectful but firm. "Thank you for the offer, but we're okay." She turned and went back to cleaning, leaving Victoria standing alone in her enormous kitchen, feeling something she rarely felt. Small. Over the next few days, Victoria couldn't stop watching David's rise. He performed on morning shows. He signed with a major label. Lincoln Center invited him for a special performance. The kid who'd been background music at her party was suddenly the hottest name in music. But what really got to Victoria was the interview David gave to a radio station. The host asked about the inspiration for Invisible, and David had been honest. "I played at this fancy event where I was literally told to be quieter so I wouldn't bother the guests. My mom has worked for the same family for over a decade. They don't even know her birthday. That's when it hit me, you know? So many of us are just background music in other people's lives. We're there, we're working, we're creating, but nobody actually sees us." He didn't mention Victoria by name. He didn't need to. Within hours, her social circles were buzzing. Everyone knew. Everyone had opinions. At her country club, conversations stopped when she walked into rooms. At the opera, old friends suddenly remembered appointments when she approached. The irony stung worse than any business failure. Victoria Ashford, the woman famous for spotting investment opportunities others missed, had been completely blind to genius playing in her own home. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on work, but everywhere she went she heard whispers, saw the looks, and worst of all, she kept thinking about Elena's face when she'd refused the help. Polite, professional. But underneath it, something else. Disappointment, maybe, or pity. One night, Victoria did something she never did. She looked up Elena's address and found herself driving to Queens to a neighborhood she'd never visited. to an apartment building with a broken buzzer and graffiti on the walls. She stood outside the community center where David taught piano lessons to kids who couldn't afford them. Through the window, she could see him working with a little boy, patiently showing him where to put his fingers. 20 kids waited their turn, sitting on folded chairs, sheet music in their laps. Victoria watched for a long time. Then she took a deep breath and walked inside. Every head turned. David's hand stopped moving on the keys. For a moment, nobody spoke. "Mrs. Ashford," David said finally. "What are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," Victoria said. The words felt strange in her mouth. She couldn't remember the last time she'd apologized to anyone. "To you and your mother. I was wrong. About everything." The kids stared at her designer coat and expensive shoes. She was so clearly out of place here in this room with scuffed floors and donated instruments. "Okay," David said slowly. And I want to do better. Not for my reputation, not to make myself feel better. Actually better." She looked around at the kids, at their eager faces. "Tell me how." David studied her for a long moment. He'd imagined this conversation 100 times. All the things he'd say, all the anger he'd release. But standing here now, looking at this powerful woman who seemed suddenly unsure of herself, he felt something unexpected. Possibility. "You really want to know?" he asked. "I really do," Victoria said. David gestured to an empty chair. "Then sit down, Mrs. Ashford. Class isn't over yet. Maybe it's time you learned something new." Victoria sat on a metal folding chair that squeaked every time she moved. Around her, 20 kids stared with wide eyes. A billionaire in their community center was not something they saw every day. David returned to his lesson with the little boy at the piano, but Victoria could feel his attention split between teaching and watching her. She stayed for the entire 2-hour session. She watched David work with students who could barely reach the pedals. She saw his patience when a girl played the same wrong note 5 times in a row. She heard the way he encouraged a shy boy who said he wasn't good enough. "Music isn't about being perfect," David told him. "It's about telling your story. And your story matters just as much as anyone else's." When the last student left, David packed up sheet music while Victoria remained seated, looking lost. "You stayed," he said, not looking at her. "I said I wanted to learn." "Most people say that. They don't mean it." David finally met her eyes. "What do you actually want, Mrs. Ashford?" Victoria took a breath. "I want to tell you I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not because you're famous now, but because I should have seen you then. You and your mother both. She's worked for me for 12 years and I don't know her favorite color. I don't know if she has siblings. I don't know anything except that she shows up and does her job. That's not right." David sat down across from her. "No, it's not. I can't change what I did. But I want to do something that matters. Something real." Victoria pulled out her phone and showed him architectural plans. "I want to build a music center here in your neighborhood. Free lessons, free instruments, professional teachers. A place where kids like these can learn without worrying about money." David scrolled through the plans. They were detailed, expensive, impressive. "And you want your name on it. Big donor recognition?" "No," Victoria said quietly. "I want you to run it. Complete control. I'll fund it, but this would be yours. I'll sit on the board if you want advice, but I won't make decisions. I've made enough decisions for people who didn't ask for my input." David leaned back, studying her face for any sign of manipulation. "Why should I trust you? 3 weeks ago I was furniture to you. You shouldn't trust me." "Not yet." Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "But I'm 70 years old, David. I've built 42 buildings in this city. When I die, they'll all have my name on them. And you know what? Not one of those buildings will matter as much as what you did with a 4-minute video. You made people feel seen. I've never done that for anyone." The honesty in her words surprised them both. David was quiet for a long moment. "I need to think about it. And I need to talk to my mom." "Of course." Victoria stood to leave, then paused. "David, that piece you played at my gala. It was beautiful. I'm sorry I didn't tell you that then." After she left, David sat alone in the empty community center, his mind racing. Could people really change? Could someone like Victoria Ashford actually learn to see differently? He called his mother. Elena listened as he explained Victoria's offer, the plans, the promise of control. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end. "What do you think, Ma?" "I think," Elena said slowly, "that people surprise you sometimes. I've worked for Victoria for 12 years and never once thought she'd apologize for anything. But she came to you. She came to your world. Maybe that means something. Or maybe she just wants to fix her reputation. Maybe, Elena agreed. But if this music center gets built, does it matter why? Those kids would have something real. Something that could change their lives. Over the next 3 months, Victoria proved herself in small ways. She showed up to every planning meeting for the music center, but she sat in the back and took notes. When David made decisions she disagreed with, she asked questions instead of arguing. She learned the names of the students from the community center. She started asking Elena about her day, actually listening to the answers. One afternoon, Victoria arrived at the penthouse to find Elena organizing the library. They'd worked together in silence for 12 years, but now Victoria pulled up a chair. "Elena, can I ask you something personal?" Elena looked surprised. "Of course, Mrs. Ashford. Please call me Victoria." "We've known each other too long for formalities." She paused. "Why did you stay? All these years working for someone who barely noticed you. Why didn't you quit?" Elena set down the book she was holding. "Because David needed music lessons. Because rent doesn't pay itself. Because good jobs are hard to find when you're a single mother without a college degree." She met Victoria's eyes. "But also because I hoped one day you might see me as a person, not just someone who cleaned your house." The words hit Victoria harder than any business criticism ever had. "I'm sorry, Elena, truly." "I know you are," Elena said softly. "The question is, what are you going to do with that sorry?" Victoria thought about that question every day as the music center took shape. She visited the construction site weekly, watching walls go up, rooms take form. She met with David to review teacher candidates, deferring to his judgment even when she had opinions. She attended fundraisers and wrote checks, but she kept her involvement quiet. The old Victoria would have wanted her name on everything. This Victoria was learning that some things mattered more than recognition. One evening at the construction site, David found Victoria standing in what would become the main performance hall. She was staring at the empty space with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You okay?" he asked. "I used to play violin," Victoria said suddenly. "When I was young. I was pretty good, actually. My father said music was a waste of time. He wanted me in business school, so I quit. Sold my violin to help pay for my first apartment in the city." She smiled sadly. "I haven't thought about that in 40 years. Do you regret it?" "I regret that I became the kind of person my father was." He saw everything as an investment or a waste. People were either useful or invisible. Victoria turned to David. "You and your mother, you're teaching me to see differently. It's harder than I expected." David understood something then. Victoria wasn't a villain in his story. She was just someone who'd forgotten how to be human, and she was trying to remember. "The center opens in 6 weeks," David said. "We'll have 60 students enrolled on day 1. Kids who would never have this chance otherwise." "That's real, Victoria. That matters because of you," she said. "I'm just funding it." "No," David corrected gently. "Because you were willing to listen. Because you were willing to admit you were wrong. That's harder than writing a check." The music center opened on a Saturday morning in spring. No fancy gala, no press conference. Just 60 kids and their families, gathered in a bright new building that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. David gave a short speech about dreams and opportunity. The mayor cut a ribbon. And then the kids poured inside to explore their new space. Touching pianos with reverent fingers, holding violins carefully, sitting at drum sets with huge grins. Victoria stood near the back, trying to stay out of the way. A little girl approached her, maybe 7 years old, with braids and a gap-toothed smile. "Are you the lady who built this place?" the girl asked. "I helped," Victoria said. "But David made it happen." "Thank you," the girl said seriously. "My mama says I can learn piano here. I've always wanted to learn piano." "What's your name?" Victoria asked. "Lily." "Well, Lily, I think you're going to be amazing." Victoria knelt down to her level. "Will you play something for me one day when you've had some lessons?" "Really?" Lily's eyes went wide. "You'd come listen to me?" "I would be honored," Victoria said, and she meant it with everything in her. As Lily ran off to explore, Elna came to stand beside Victoria. They watched the chaos of excited children together, both women smiling. "Thank you," Elena said, "for all of this." "Thank you," Victoria replied, "for giving me a chance to be better, for not giving up on me." We don't give up on people, Elena said simply. That's not who we are. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. These people, this family she'd treated as invisible for so many years, had shown her more grace than she deserved. They'd given her something she didn't know she was missing, a chance to matter for the right reasons. Across the room, David was helping a student adjust their grip on drumsticks, patient and encouraging. He looked up and caught Victoria's eye, giving her a small nod. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement, recognition. And for the first time in a very long time, Victoria Ashford felt truly seen. 6 months after the music center opened, Victoria found herself doing something she never imagined. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a group of 8-year-olds, learning basic music theory. David had suggested she take a class not as a donor or board member, but as a student. At first she'd laughed at the idea. Then she'd realized he was serious. "Mrs. Ashford, you're not listening to the rhythm," the instructor said gently. She was a young woman named Crystal, one of the teachers David had hired. "Try again. Clap with me." Victoria, who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals, struggled to clap a simple beat. The children around her giggled, not meanly, just amused. And instead of feeling embarrassed, Victoria found herself laughing too. "I'm terrible at this," she admitted. "You're learning," Crystal corrected. "That's different from being terrible." After class, Victoria stayed to help stack chairs. Another thing the old her would never have done. David was in his office reviewing applications for scholarships. The center had become so popular they were turning students away. They needed to expand. "We got another 50 applications this week," David told Victoria when she knocked on his door. "Families from 3 different neighborhoods. Word is spreading." "That's wonderful," Victoria said, then hesitated. "David, I've been thinking."
"What if we opened a second location?"
"Maybe in the Bronx?" David looked up from his paperwork. "That would cost a fortune." "I have a fortune," Victoria said simply. "What's the point of it if I'm not using it for something that matters?" "You've already given so much." "No," Victoria shook her head. "I've written checks. But you, Elena, these kids, you've given me something more valuable. You've reminded me what it means to be human." "Let me do this," David studied her face. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have believed this transformation was real. But he'd watched Victoria show up every week. He'd seen her on her hands and knees helping to install shelving. He'd witnessed her quiet conversations with parents, learning their stories, remembering their names. This wasn't an act. This was someone genuinely trying to change. "Okay," he said finally. "But same rules. You fund it, I run it. Deal?" Victoria stood to leave, then turned back. "Oh, and David? I'm playing in the student recital next month." "You're what?" "Crystal thinks I'm ready for a simple piece. Nothing fancy. Just Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on the violin." Victoria's cheeks flushed. "I bought a violin last week. Been practicing every night. I'm absolutely awful. But I figure if these kids can be brave enough to perform, so can I." David felt a grin spread across his face. "I'll make sure to come." "Please don't," Victoria groaned. "It's going to be painful to listen to." "Exactly why I need to be there," David said, his eyes twinkling. "Wouldn't miss it." The recital was held on a Sunday afternoon. The small performance hall filled with parents, siblings, and proud grandparents. Kids performed with varying levels of skill, some confident, others nervous. Each one received thunderous applause. Victoria waited backstage, her hands shaking. She was 70 years old, about to perform in front of an audience for the first time since she was 12. Her violin felt foreign in her hands despite weeks of practice. Elena found her there, pacing. "You're going to be wonderful." "I'm going to be terrible," Victoria corrected. "Why did I agree to this?" "Because you're showing these kids that it's never too late to try something new. That being brave matters more than being perfect." Elena squeezed her hand. "That's worth more than any donation." When Victoria's name was called, she walked onto the stage on shaking legs. The audience was mostly families, but she spotted David in the 3rd row, Elena beside him. She also saw little Lily from opening day, sitting with her mother, waving excitedly. Victoria lifted the violin to her shoulder. Her bow touched the strings. And she began to play. It wasn't good. She knew that. Her notes were scratchy. Her timing was off. She missed 2 notes completely. But she kept going, focusing on the music, on the feeling of creating sound, of telling a story, even if it was just a simple nursery rhyme. When she finished, the applause was deafening. Not because she'd played well, but because everyone there understood what courage looked like. Victoria bowed, her eyes wet with tears, and returned to her seat. David found her after the recital. "You did it." "I was awful," Victoria said, but she was smiling. "You were brave," David corrected. "And that matters more." Over the following months, something shifted in Victoria's life. She started spending less time in her office and more time at the music center. She took weekly violin lessons. She volunteered to help with fundraising and outreach. She got to know the students not as beneficiaries of her charity, but as individual people with dreams and personalities and stories. There was Tommy, who wanted to be a drummer, but was deaf in one ear. They figured out how to help him feel the rhythm through vibrations. There was Jasmine, whose father had been deported, who poured her grief into the cello. There was Roberto, who was brilliant at piano but struggled to read because of dyslexia. Each child taught Victoria something new about resilience, about joy, about finding music in unexpected places. One afternoon, Victoria was helping Lily practice when the girl asked her a question that stopped her cold. "Miss Victoria, why did you decide to help us?" Victoria set down the sheet music. "You want the honest answer?" Lily nodded seriously. "Because I forgot what it meant to really see people. I walked around like everyone was just there to make my life easier. I missed beautiful things because I wasn't paying attention." Victoria touched Lily's hand gently. "Your teacher, David, he reminded me that everyone matters. Everyone has something special inside them. I almost missed seeing that." "But you see it now," Lily said simply. "Yes," Victoria smiled. "Now I see it, and I'm grateful I learned before it was too late." That evening, Victoria returned to her penthouse to find Elena still there, finishing up some work. They'd fallen into a new rhythm over these months. Conversations over coffee, shared stories about their days, a friendship built on honesty and second chances. "Elena, sit down for a minute," Victoria said. "I want to talk to you about something." Elena joined her at the kitchen table, curious. "I've been thinking about reducing my workload," Victoria began. "I want to spend more time at the music center, maybe start working with other donors to create similar programs in other cities. But I can't do that if I'm running my company full-time." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to step back, promote someone from within to run the day-to-day operations, which means I won't need full-time household help anymore." Victoria saw Elena's face fall and quickly continued. "But I'd like to hire you for something else. The music center needs a program director, someone to coordinate between families and teachers, handle enrollment, manage the daily operations, someone who understands what these families need because she's lived it." Elena stared at her. "You want me to work at the music center?" "I want you to help run it. With a real salary, benefits, vacation time, all the things I should have given you years ago." Victoria's voice was soft. "You've earned this 1,000 times over, Elena. Not because you cleaned my house, but because you're one of the strongest, most capable people I know. David got his strength from somewhere. Let me do this right." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Talk to David, make sure it's what you want." Victoria reached across the table and took Elena's hand. "But know that if you say yes, you'd be doing me the honor, not the other way around." Later that night, Elena sat with David in their small apartment, telling him about Victoria's offer. He listened quietly, then pulled out his phone and showed his mother something he'd been working on. "I've been composing again," he said. "A new piece. Want to hear what I'm calling it?" Elena nodded. "Scene," David said softly. "It's about transformation, about people who were invisible becoming visible, about second chances and growth and forgiveness." He met his mother's eyes. "It's about all of us, even Victoria." Elena pulled her son into a hug. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best," David said. "A woman who taught me that everyone deserves to be seen, including billionaires who forget how to be human." They sat together in comfortable silence, both thinking about how far they'd come. How a single moment of dismissal had somehow transformed into something beautiful. How anger had turned into understanding. How 3 lives had changed because one boy refused to stay invisible. Outside their window, the city sparkled with lights. Millions of people living their lives, each one with a story worth telling. And somewhere across town, in a penthouse overlooking it all, Victoria Ashford practiced her violin badly but joyfully, finally understanding that the best music comes from the heart. 2 years after that charity gala, David stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. At 19, he'd already accomplished more than most musicians dream of in a lifetime. A record deal, sold-out performances. His music played on radio stations across the country. But tonight was different. Tonight felt bigger than all of that. Tonight was the world premiere of his first symphony, a 40-minute piece he'd poured his heart into for 8 months. He'd titled it Scene, and it told a story that had changed 3 lives forever. In the audience, Elena sat in the 5th row wearing a beautiful navy dress. Not borrowed this time, not bought out of obligation. She'd chosen it herself with money from her new job as program director of the Ashford Chen Music Center. That's what they'd named it, despite Victoria's protests. David had insisted. Both names belonged there. Beside Elena sat her sister and brother-in-law, flown in from California for the occasion. They kept squeezing her hand, so proud they could barely sit still. A few seats away, Victoria adjusted her glasses and reread the program for the 3rd time. Her daughter Rachel had flown in from London, surprised by her mother's transformation. They'd been distant for years, Victoria too busy building her empire to build a relationship with her only child. But things were different now. They talked weekly. Rachel had visited the music center twice, watching her mother help kids with their homework, learning everyone's names, being present in a way she never had been before. "I almost don't recognize you, Mum," Rachel whispered. "In the best way possible." "I almost don't recognize myself," Victoria admitted. "Turns out I was living half a life and didn't even know it." The lights dimmed. The audience settled into their seats. The orchestra members took their places, tuning their instruments in that chaotic harmony that always comes before something beautiful begins. David walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He stood at the conductor's podium, baton in hand, and looked out at the sea of faces. He found his mother first, saw her tears already falling. Then he found Victoria, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. He raised his baton. The symphony began. The first movement started with a single piano, playing a melody that sounded lost and lonely. Slowly, other instruments joined in, but they played over the piano, drowning it out, ignoring its song. This was David's story. The boy at the gala playing music nobody heard. The second movement shifted. The strings took over with a steady, repeating pattern. Strong and reliable, but tired. This was Elena's movement. Years of work, years of showing up, years of being the foundation nobody noticed. The melody was beautiful in its persistence, heartbreaking in its invisibility. Victoria felt tears on her cheeks. She'd never heard herself in David's first piece, but she heard Elena now. Heard the strength and sacrifice and quiet dignity of a woman she'd overlooked for 12 years. The music made her feel the weight of that oversight in a way words never could. The third movement exploded into sound. Every instrument playing together. No longer background noise, but a full choir of voices demanding to be heard. This was the moment of transformation. The refusing to stay quiet. The insistence on being seen. The music built and built until it felt like the whole hall might lift off the ground. Then came the fourth movement, and something unexpected happened. The orchestra softened. The piano returned, but this time it wasn't alone. Every instrument supported it, listened to it, made space for it. And then something even more surprising. A violin solo. Simple. Imperfect. Playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, woven into the symphony's melody. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. David had written her into the music, not as she'd been, but as she was becoming. Someone learning, growing, making mistakes, but trying. Someone who'd found her way back to the music she'd abandoned decades ago. The final movement brought everything together. Piano, strings, violin, all the voices at once, but this time in harmony. Not fighting for space, but creating something bigger together. The music swelled into a crescendo that spoke of hope and second chances and the beautiful mess of people learning to truly see each other. When the last note faded, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then the audience erupted. People leapt to their feet, applauding so loudly the chandeliers seemed to shake. David turned from the podium, gesturing for the orchestra to stand. They bowed together, but David wasn't done. He stepped down from the podium and gestured toward the audience. Toward his mother. Elena stood slowly, overwhelmed as the spotlight found her. The applause grew louder. Then David gestured to Victoria, who shook her head. Trying to stay seated. "Stand up, Mum," Rachel whispered, gently pulling her mother to her feet. Victoria rose, uncomfortable with the attention but accepting it. This wasn't about her, but she was part of the story now. She'd earned her place in it not through money or power, but through showing up, listening, changing. At the reception afterward, people crowded around David, critics and musicians and producers all wanting a piece of his success, but he kept scanning the room until he found his mother and Victoria standing together by the windows. Talking quietly, he made his way through the crowd to them. "That violin solo," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "You put my terrible playing in your symphony." "It wasn't terrible," David said. It was honest. It was someone brave enough to start over, to admit they'd been wrong, to learn something new at 70 years old. That's worth celebrating. "I heard myself in the second movement," Elena said softly. "Thank you for seeing me, sweetheart, even when others didn't. You taught me how to see, Ma. You taught me that everyone has a song worth hearing." David looked between the two women who'd shaped his life in such different ways. "Both of you taught me that." A young reporter approached them, notebook in hand. "David, can I ask about the dedication?" "It mentions your mother, which makes sense." "But also Victoria Ashford. Isn't she the person from that interview you gave, the one who—" "She's the person who proved that people can change," David interrupted gently. "She's someone who was brave enough to admit she was wrong and then did the hard work to become better. That's worth recognizing." Victoria felt more tears coming. "I don't deserve that grace." "Maybe not," David agreed. "But we're giving it to you anyway. That's what forgiveness looks like." As the reception continued, Victoria found herself in conversation with parents from the music center. They thanked her for the program, for giving their kids a chance. But she kept redirecting the credit to Elena, to David, to the teachers who showed up every day. Later, standing alone on the Carnegie Hall steps while waiting for her car, Victoria looked out at the New York streets. The doorman helping guests into taxis, the cleaning crew visible through the windows, the food delivery workers rushing past on bikes. She saw them all now, really saw them, and wondered about their stories, their dreams, their hidden talents. Her phone buzzed. A text from David. "Thank you for listening 2 years ago. That changed everything," she typed back. "Thank you for playing loud enough that I couldn't ignore you anymore." Rachel joined her on the steps. "You ready to go home, Mom?" "Actually," Victoria said slowly, "I was thinking we could grab coffee somewhere. Not somewhere fancy, just a regular place where we can talk." "Really talk? I want to hear about your life, your work, everything I've missed by not paying attention." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I'd love that." As they walked down the street together, Victoria thought about the symphony she'd just heard, about how all those different instruments had learned to play together, how the piano that once was background music had become the heart of something beautiful, how even a simple, imperfect violin could find its place in the melody. She thought about the music center and the kids who filled it every day with noise and laughter and dreams. About Elena, who'd shown her what true strength looked like. About David, who'd refused to stay invisible and in doing so had made everyone around him more visible too. The old Victoria had measured success in buildings and bank accounts. This Victoria understood that success was measured in different ways. In the smile on a child's face when they played their first song. In the friendship between two women who'd started as employer and employee, but became something more. In the courage to admit you were wrong and then spend every day trying to be better. Somewhere across the city in a small apartment in Queens, David sat at his keyboard with his headphones on. He was already working on his next piece. The notes flowed from his fingers like water, like light, like hope. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't playing to be heard. He was playing because the music demanded to be created, because silence was no longer an option, because he'd learned that everyone has a symphony inside them waiting to be written. All they need is someone willing to listen. The end.